All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 13th Oak Harbor Planning Commission meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order at 6 p.m. We'll start with a roll call, and it looks like everyone is here in person, and that's the roll call. We'll move on to our minutes for April 8th. I'll give you all a moment to look through those. And when you're ready, any discussion or motion to approve those?
I make a motion that we approve last month's minutes as written.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by Bradley, second by Fry. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, motion passes unanimously. Okay. We will move on to our public comment section. During this time, citizens may comment on subjects of interest not on the agenda or agenda items. Please ensure that your comments are recorded properly, state your name clearly and into a microphone. Individual comments will be limited to 3 minutes during this 15-minute time frame. You can all also submit public comments online at www.oakharbor.gov/public comment at least 2 days, business days in advance of the Planning Commission meeting. So it looks like we didn't receive any prior to the meeting, and we will move on to folks who are in the room. Seeing none, we'll move to folks online. Seeing none. Going once, going twice. Thank you all for your public comments. We'll move right along. So our only action discussion item today is our design regulations and guidelines and those revisions presented by our senior planner, Ray Lindenberg. So we will kick that off, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, members of the Planning Commission. Good evening. I feel like we've probably been through this a few times, and I don't want to start getting into the weeds too far, but I do want to give a little background because we are hoping for a motion to forward this to the City Council for approval. So I'll give you a little bit of background on where we're going with this, and you got a copy in your packet there to review, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that. But what we're doing tonight is taking a look at our design regulations and guidelines document, and that is what controls, or we review the aesthetic qualities of developments against. And specifically, we are looking at the residential portion of that document. There are two things that kind of pushed this into motion. One of them was the adoption of Ordinance 1953 back in 2022, which reduced the minimum lot size for properties and the setbacks for properties. And the kind of intent for doing that was to streamline the process a little bit so developers didn't have to go through the PRD process, and that's planned residential development. Planned residential developments allow the city to get certain mitigations in exchange for reducing lot sizes. And one of those mitigations was the ability to review the exterior design of houses, look at the materials and the architecture of those. And so what we wanted to do was still have a little bit of say into that, but not too much. We don't want to dig too far, again, into the weeds as far as design is concerned, especially when it comes to single-family homes, because we are sensitive to cost increases when you get into higher quality materials and greater architectural kind of design standards. So we did review some recent subdivisions through SEPA and made sure that the aesthetics were of high quality, or appropriate quality, I should say, for what we're looking for in the city. And that was the case in those. But however, we wanted to make sure that, number one, those criteria are outlined in a document. And number two, the second reason that we're here is because of the recent changes at the state level. The passage of House Bill 1110 stated that we cannot have higher standards or more stringent standards for multifamily than we do for single family. And what that is trying to do at the state level is to kind of even the playing field, make it so that there aren't kind of arbitrary or increased design standards for those more affordable multifamily housing projects. We already had multifamily standards, so essentially what we did is we tied them together. We felt that our multifamily standards were appropriate, not too egregious or difficult to meet. And so we just kind of tied in our single-family development standards, or excuse me, design standards into those multifamily standards to make them essentially equivalent. And so that's what we've done with the draft that we have before you today. Again, because of the mitigation measures for increased density, we wanted to make sure that that was being reviewed and gone over and approved by staff when we go through that. So essentially what we have here is also a little bit of reorganization. We move things around for better readability within the document. That's why we gave you the full document, the original and the new version, just so you can get an idea of context and how it all fits together. We included some new graphics, some new photos in there, updated to kind of show what it is that we're talking about as far as some of these design standards. And now we have Section 5 that encompasses all residential design, not just multifamily residential design. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Our single-family design concepts include architectural interests, but not a specific style of architecture. If somebody wants to do a craftsman-style home, they can do that. If they want to do something modern, they can do that too, as long as there's architectural interest and quality design, not just boxes. And number 2 there is calling out the reduced front yard setback that happened through 1953. And essentially what that is we used to have a 20-foot standard front yard setback that was for the entire building. What we did is made it so that you can have living space and or a front porch at a 10-foot setback. The driveway in a front-facing garage still has to be 20 feet, and that is to de-emphasize the garage itself, but also allow for parking to take place in the driveway and not just in the garage. We wanted to make sure that neighborhood context is kind of preserved there, and friendly facades. Essentially, you know where that front door is, and it's not just a big wall of garage doors as you go down the streets. Consideration of privacy. One of the things that we do have in there is to have people take a look at where the windows are located on the side of the house. So you're not just looking straight into your neighbor's kitchen window when you're washing the dishes or their bedroom or what have you. And finally, reducing the domination of automobiles and their storage on the aesthetics of the neighborhood. Again, that recessed garage door, and trying to make it so that we don't just see lines of cars as we go down our residential streets there. Now we have a new section specifically adding guidance for narrow lot house design as well, and that was from a document that we did a couple of years ago right after that Ordinance 1953 came out. And that was just an informational type document, but we folded it into the DRG to give a little bit more information, a little bit fleshing out of what it is that we're talking about, and taking advantage of those reduced front yard setbacks to the living space. So that is the original document that I was talking about, the narrow lot residential development that we kind of gave as an informational handout. Like I said, we incorporated some of that information into the new DRG Section 5 there. So that is the extent of what we have. We did talk a little bit about cottage courts and some of the other types of developments, but we did keep it specifically single-family residentially kind of oriented, and then made some minor edits to the multifamily section to make sure that everything was consistent so that we don't get in trouble with that House Bill 1110. Make sure we're consistent on both of those and not creating a situation where we have higher standards for those multifamily projects. So what we have tonight is a recommendation and a motion to take a look at there. If there's any discussion or questions, I am available to answer those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we will move on to, does anyone have any questions? Go for it.
Real quick, just to clarify on your setbacks for residential. Say, let's just use the 10-foot setback from your front door.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's more 20, but that's a minimum, right? It could be more than that if you have the room, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You'll find that in all of our setbacks, whether it's side, front,
It's
rear.
just a minimum. Okay,
That's a
thank you.
minimum. Yes.
Other thoughts? Other questions? Okay. I have a few. So we'll start with, so in this, right, making the single-family residential components consistent with multifamily. that throughout this process, have y'all thought about any other changes to multifamily or commercial design or other parts of this that you wanted to explore, or was this really mostly focused on getting single-family components in line to, I guess, right, protect the multifamily components as,
So-
yeah,
Yeah, it started out as getting single family in there. Because the change to the code in Ordinance 1953 happened in 2022, so it's been 3 years now. The House Bill 1110 is more recent, so when we kind of went through this process, it kind of made sense to merge them together. So it started out more as a revision to the single-family residential, but also became a situation where we did go back and review some of the aspects of the multifamily residential. We didn't really look at commercial. We went through that previously back in 2019 when we went over the central business district standards. The Main Street Association had proposed some changes to that we folded into the existing DRG document. So yes, it started out as a single-family residential, became a slightly larger project, but at the same time, it was kind of running in 2 lanes at the same time, making sure that those 2 lanes were fairly consistent with each other. There are some differences just because of the nature of the beasts, right? But we wanted to make sure that we were compliant with House Bill 1110 mostly, so we don't get in trouble with the state. And that's, just the reality of it, honestly.
for sure. And I guess, can you talk a little bit more about like a lot of my upcoming questions are going to ask more about like how this document and it works in practice, right? So I'll get to that eventually, but I'm curious about sort of the thought process of why increase regulations and guidelines for single-family houses to meet those multifamily standards instead of reducing multifamily standards to meet single-family, or to like be, in that same vein of less restrictive in
Right.
line with the
That's-
single-family.
Yeah, that's a really good question. To be perfectly honest, our multifamily standards are pretty easy to meet. They are not specific on architectural styles. They aren't specific on a lot of detail stuff that some design regulations are, design guidelines are. So we felt it was appropriate to kind of mirror those. And to be perfectly honest, I have not, in my almost 11 years here, seen a single-family house permit come in that wouldn't meet these standards. I have seen very few multifamily that didn't meet the standards, and we were easily able to get it there. And usually what it is we want to see articulation in the roof line. We don't want to have a ridge line that's 100 feet long that's just one solid line. So we have them take it halfway through and offset part of the building. And so a lot of that, is easily kind of negotiated out in the process. When we do multifamily, it's in the site plan process generally. We say, hey, look, this doesn't meet our design regulations and guideline standards. You need to articulate this portion of the wall or the ridge line, put in some sort of breakup in the wall or work on your materials. And we haven't had any issues with that, no real pushback on it, because it is a pretty easy bar to meet. But at the same time, it produces something that is of good quality. And we don't want to, start going down a path where we're prescribing an architectural style, or we're saying you have to do this and you have to do that, because to me, personally, that reduces all semblance of creativity, but also it creates a situation where all buildings start to look the same. Because people start designing from a checklist instead of actually designing.
And so in terms of like these design guidelines being implemented in practice, can you walk us through a little bit about like I guess there's 2 pathways that I want to ask about. So one, how does this document come into play during like subdivision and larger development proposals? Like where in that process does that get looked at? And then sort of the same question about like if there is in particular like an older neighborhood that's basically built out, there's a vacant lot, someone wants to build a house, does that process also follow these design guidelines, and like how do those 2 things get resolved, I guess.
Yeah, so in this situation of a single-family subdivision, we would have the developer submit to us proposed plans or plans that they have considered that they might use. Here's the style that we want to, look at or pick from. A lot of subdivision these days, the ones that we've looked at, are single builder. They come in, they have, their plans that they're going to use. They design the lots around those houses, the widths and the depths and everything, because we are working with such, tight spaces now. If you have a 5-foot setback on either side and you have a 45-foot wide lot, you know what house you're going to put there because it won't fit otherwise. There are also standards for lot coverage. We have a 45% lot coverage maximum, and today actually was the first time I found one in one of our smaller subdivisions that went over that. We're having to send it back to them to change it. So there are other regulations, dimensional standards that come into play as well. So anyway, what they would do is they would submit, some proposed designs. We would take a look at that at the subdivision phase, say, yes, this looks good. And then when it comes back into an actual building permit, we're not expecting them necessarily to have the exact same plan because sometimes things do change. But we are looking at being in substantial conformance or substantively similar to what it is they submitted on a detail level. I'm not saying, well, you told us there was going to be craftsman style houses here and these are modern. Not getting into the weeds there. What we are looking at is you told us you were going to have this kind of level of detail and the garages were going to be set back from front porches. Do we have that? Yes. Okay, let's move on. So it is a fairly high level, review at that point. And like I said, I think that the market being what it is right now, people don't want ugly, boring, cheap looking houses. You're spending $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 on a house. You want it to look decent. And so the market responds to that. And, we're looking at affordable housing. Those look good too. We have an architect who works on our Habitat for Humanity submittals, and they look good. They've got the nice front porches. They've got the good quality building materials. They're a little bit boxy, but a lot of houses are boxy. But you can do it in a way that makes sense for the neighborhood and respects the neighborhood and the context, and they end up looking really nice. So we've been happy with the process so far.
Awesome. Okay, two more. So one is, in sort of practice, the idea of privacy in those sort of side yards, and how does that manifest pretty? I guess, does staff have trouble sort of interpreting and bringing comments back to that about, this house next to you has these windows here, think about doing something a little bit different, or is it a little bit more amorphous than that?
It is, I don't want to say we ignore it, but we definitely put less of an emphasis on that than we do to the visual aspect of the public realm, right? The front of the house, we want to make sure that it's not all just garage door. If the side of the house faces, if it's corner lot or something, we want to have some sort of visual interest, whether it's the materials carry from the front of the house around the side, things like that. Typically, again, when you're dealing with 45-foot wide lots or 40-foot wide lots, the builder kind of has it in their mind already, look, we can't have 2 bedroom windows right across from each other. And typically when you have a house design that is narrow and deep, you're going to put your living spaces on the front or the back anyway. You might have a bathroom window up high or something like that. But for the most part, it kind of works itself out. We do look at it. And, a lot of builders now are putting up fences with the houses too, and that helps. And landscaping gets installed, and that helps as well. So it's kind of lower on the criteria list. But if one of our reviewers sees something that's egregious and says, hey, wait a minute, you might want to look into changing that, maybe you flip the house or something like that. So it's more of an advisory thing at that point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One other, sorry, two more questions now.
Sure.
So in line with like reducing setbacks and wanting sort of friendly facades and having, that public realm be the priority in these design guidelines, does that sort of looking larger scale and what our like right-of-way requirements and on street parking and sort of those design components of the street. I don't see them in here, and I'm not asking for them to be in here, but like, do you have a good sense of how those two components of sort of the public realm should be intersecting?
Yeah, it's kind of a science experiment at this point, trying to figure out exactly how many parking spaces you need for a subdivision, because we have one or two that we've gotten complaints about, and we have issues with. The fire department can't get through because there's too many cars parked and stuff like that. So, we have our street cross-section standards, and we've been working through that. We're trying to make sure that we have street trees and we have, an attractive looking neighborhood without just having 60 feet of pavement or whatever it is. So there are a lot of different options available to builders. The new Cedar Hill subdivision up on Crosby, what they did, and this was working with staff, is instead of having 2 5-foot park strips, one on each side, is we had them do a 10-foot park strip on one side, no park strip on the other. And on the side that doesn't have the park strip is where we put the street parking. So on the other side of the street, you have a nice wide park strip that allows the trees to flourish, and allows larger trees, which I think is a net benefit in that situation. So it's kind of like, we're going through it, and trees take a while to grow up. So, it's kind of let the market decide on some of it. We have our standards, and we'll hold to those. But neighborhoods are going to look a little bit different, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, honestly. If you have big trees on one side and smaller trees on the other side, that's okay too.
Cool. All right. And last question, I guess, is as we are talking about smaller lots and, that condensed sort of form in town, is that from at whatever, amount of experience that you all have at this point, are we seeing that be, I guess, attractive or successful compared to sort of, the different idea of saying, people want more space, people, maybe want a big yard and they want their neighbors to have a big yard, and compared to sort of this lifestyle change of having closer together neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I'm not a real estate person. I think there is room in this world for all types, right? So Cedar Hill came in as a plat before we changed the code requirement to have the smaller lot sizes. So they're building on larger lots, and they're building houses now. We've had a few come in at the smaller lot size. We had Sean Ridge came in at the smaller lot size. We have Ridgeway Heights. They're all under construction. We have Preston Heights on the other side of the highway between SR 20 and Scenic Heights that is under, they're doing their site improvements right now. Ridgeway Heights are selling houses, and I think that's a good sign. The economy is kind of up in the air right now, but they're selling houses out there. We've had, let's see, I'm trying to think, what was the other subdivision we did that was that size? In any case, Howard's Point was it was a PRD one, but those were smaller lots as well. The smaller lots are selling, and I think that there is enough demand right now for single-family homes specifically that people are willing to accept that this is kind of the new reality, is you have a smaller lot. So, it's the trade-off versus having a smaller lot that is your own versus having a townhouse or, some sort of attached building that you have neighbors on either side of you. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, sorry, one more. This is what I do for my job, and this is very interesting, and I enjoy hearing about what you as staff are doing. So simultaneously to the idea of like narrow lots and all that, is there any thought to including a component of accessory structures or ways to, now that we have super small lots and wanting, if people are interested in doing those sort of backyard cottages or conversions of their garage, those types of things, are there any, I guess, do these design guidelines address that in a way that feels comfortable, or is that sort of a separate component that should be addressed somewhere else or eventually updated here again?
So there are a couple of things at play there. Number one, if you are doing a detached accessory dwelling unit, a detached ADU, it falls under the criteria of a accessory building. So your garages, your sheds, your ADUs all fall under the same kind of category as far as how they are located in the yard and what they're supposed to look like. And what they're supposed to look like is complementary to the existing house on the property. Whether that means, you have vertical siding versus horizontal siding, or paint colors, trim colors, et cetera, we have kind of, stayed away from that because it does include garages and things. That being said, we are probably eventually moving to a form-based code, in which case there might be a little bit more delving into design standards for specifically residential units. But I don't honestly anticipate that being significantly different. I think that it's a good idea that a dwelling unit, whether it be an ADU or whatever in somebody's backyard, doesn't look like a shed. But if somebody wants to live in a building that looks like a shed and it's in the backyard, that's probably just fine. I mean, we're trying to get affordable housing, and so having a bunch of gingerbread on a 400 square foot building in somebody's backyard that nobody ever sees except for the person that lives there, if the person that lives there is okay with that, then we should be okay with that as well. And I don't want to start adding costs on because we're saying, well, you have to have, an architectural feature here for a building that nobody really ever sees. And so that's kind of the balancing act. We want quality. We want buildings that are nice and are going to last. And I think that's really the key. So I don't see us delving that far down in the future.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any other questions? Yes.
Thanks, Josh. And thanks for that, Ray. And I'll just give you a preview to, one of my concerns is anytime we have the word shall. There's a lot of shoulds in here, and that's good because, again, these are design guidelines, and as long as we're going to continue to regulate construction through density and zoning, as you and I have talked, right, it's hard to move forward to that form-based code, and we got to be careful that we're not creating a form-based code while having those other restrictions in place, because otherwise that could just kill construction. So anytime I see a shall in the document, I'm going to caution everybody on this committee, right, that we're laying out a requirement, right? We're adding an additional requirement to a free market enterprise, right, that is somewhat fragile. And you're right, things are selling and the market's going to speak. The 10-foot setback, having that be a practice or a should, that certainly makes sense. But, if some developer was to come along and decide to create a neighborhood with 7,000 square foot lots because that's what the market is now needing, I'd hate to think that house has to be, the living area has to be 10 feet from the street on that lot that has sufficient size, right? Because it would just be odd, right? And so, and obviously the cost of building on a larger lot is a higher cost, and it's not an affordable house, and I get all that, but I don't want to lose the other side of it in that conversation, because that's part of the quality of life, having, right, obviously different neighborhoods and different. In fact, I think neighborhoods should be intertwined. I think we should have neighborhoods with 8,000 square foot lots right next to 3,000 square foot lots, right? Right down the street from a fourplex, right? And those create healthy neighborhoods, right? And part of the reduction in lot size was a thought about mixing it up, because the minimum lot size isn't the only size you can have. It's just the minimum. And of course, we're trying to steer folks to be smart about the development, but ultimately, the market speaks, and you get that. So shalls are just, concerning. Like the oak tree, right? Did we add that onto the residential requirement because it was a multifamily requirement so that we weren't more restrictive? Because I didn't see it in the multifamily requirement of planting of an oak tree, but it's now part of a residential requirement.
It is in there, and if I may kind of address what you were saying previously, think of a shall in the DRG as a soft shall. So what we're doing here is the DRG has shoulds and it has shalls. Both of those and everything, honestly, in the DRG can easily be varied from. If you look at the last section there, pretty much we will grant an administrative variance if you give us a reason. And in the situation of a shall with that, it is a shall with an asterisk. We're essentially emphasizing that point by saying shall. Like, for instance, a front porch shall project, in front of the garage door. What we're trying to do is emphasize the idea that the pedestrian entrance should be more, visible or impactful than the car entrance. If you're dealing with a property that's 70 or 80 feet wide and you are playing around with different designs and stuff, we would take a look at the context of that. And if the developer said, look, this is not how we're looking at this, we're going to do something different, I don't see a situation where we're going to say no to a variance request that is reasonable. If somebody wanted to put a 4-car garage at the very front and then have the rest of the house around the back when there's plenty of room to not do that, that might be a situation where we'd hold the line. But what we're trying to do is have flexibility here, and that flexibility is in that variance section at the end. And that applies to all sorts of things. And we have gone through back and forth with developers on that and given lots of variations to this document.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. We just need to make sure that all planners, current and future, understand that that shall is used in that context, because most of us read the word shall, that means we don't have an escape built for it. And so when we see that, it's automatically that's the way it's going to have to be. And somebody who comes in later at a later date and replaces you when you retire and are long and gone, don't know what went on in this room today, sees shall, and they're going to hold a construction guy or gal to that shall rather than, oh, well, we can mitigate that. So I agree with Councilmember Wiesner is that could be kind of a cautionary term where could still be used in place of that. That would give more lenience, but then that gives more lenience to the construction side of the home rather than to the planning commission. So maybe something like should at the discretion of city planners. But I don't know how you'd word it, but
Yeah, and
I know that shall gets me in trouble at work a lot.
yeah, I would still point to the variance section at the end, that anything in that DRG can be varied from, and it explicitly says that that you can vary from these provisions, with written approval, and essentially the written approval is the set of plans. If the planner looks at it and stamps it, that is the written approval, right? So when we go through our review process, we are, as planners, thinking about a checklist of shalls and shoulds and whatever else is. And if we look at it and it is meeting the standards and it is meeting the intent of what we're trying to do, then we are going to likely approve that. This, to me, is not a way of denying things. This is a way of increasing the level of, excellence, if you will. It's trying to bring up, instead of just doing basic boxes, it's trying to say, look, we have pride in this community and we want the best for this community. And it is not by any means a checklist. Again, we don't want checklists because that stifles creativity. So it is more guidelines than it is standards.
Continue. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and we've had times where shall in other ordinances, not necessarily in planning department ordinances, but I think our food truck ordinance, right, that we misinterpreted for the longest time, had some shalls in it, and that's, even though we were looking at the wrong ordinance, that we used that ordinance to basically, kill food trucks in the community until we made that change, and you guys, of course, brought that change forward. You found the right code for us, right? But those shalls, kept getting in the way. just my concern, and I guess on the Gary Oak thing, I just picture as a land developer, Sean Ridge is a perfect example. Those lots could end up inevitably being sold off as individual lots if they were to get in there, obviously, and complete the landscaping and complete the final plat. They could sell those off as individual lots, right? And if every 7 houses, there's got to be an oak tree planted, and let's say it's not a PRD and there is no common area, we have some notes about, landscaping requirements and et cetera have to go in the common area or an area controlled by the HOA. How does that work? Ultimately, which lot gets the oak tree planted on it if there is not a common area in a non-PRD development? Right? I mean, are you then going to create just a landscaping strip for that oak tree to go into, as a common area, which then creates now an HOA has to be formed in order to maintain that strip of land for the common area. So I can see how, in a multifamily application, typically where you're dealing on a much larger scale, much larger lot, how that can make sense. But, how are we going to shoehorn that into a 3,200 square foot lot if there isn't a common area?
So to respond directly to that, I would never, ever recommend that somebody plant a Gary Oak tree on their 3,200 square foot single-family lot. Because the implication of that is in 20 years, as that tree gets bigger and bigger, you use less and less of your lot, right? So 1 tree per 7 residential units, I would say that always goes into a common open space, whatever that common open space is. Whether it's a stormwater facility or if it's a neighborhood park or if it's park strips or the frontage along, the major thoroughfare, whatever that may be, but also can be varied from. So the reason that came in, and we had this discussion previously, is to make it more equal to multifamily. Our previous version of this document, the DRG, said that you had to have Gary Oak trees in multifamily projects. That's so wide open and so open to interpretation, nobody really knew what it meant. So 10.5 years ago, when I did my first multifamily project and we said, well, you got to have a Gary Oak tree, we looked at it and that project had 7 units. So guess what? We're at 1 per 7 now. That's how it happened, literally. Because that was the requirement at the time, and nobody had thought to put a ratio in there. They just said, put Gary Oak trees in. So what does that mean? Well, now it means 1 per 7. So we put that in there officially because otherwise, what does it mean? We need to have something to point to, right?
And a perfect example of why the simple wording in a document like this becomes so important.
Yeah.
Right, because this is going to carry forward what you guys recommend to council and what council ends up ultimately approving is a carry forward document that is going to be here for probably many, many years.
Yep.
I appreciate you hearing me out. And like I say, the shalls always just give me caution. But thanks for hearing me out.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other thoughts for staff? Okay, so thank you very much. And at this point, we have a recommendation for a motion to bring this to town council, or to city council, sorry. And I would entertain that now.
All right. I move to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for approval of the revised design regulations and guidelines documented via resolution at the future council meeting.
Moved by Bradley. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Second by Wilson. So motion is on the table. Is there any discussion that we want to have between us before we sort of have a formal vote? Any final thoughts? Any other components that we want to talk through? Will you speak into the microphone, please?
I just wanted to bring up, I don't know if there was a typo in one of the slides, and so we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay. Any specific thoughts? Okay, so with that, I will ask for a vote. So all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying no. Anyone who wishes to abstain, please signify by saying abstain.
Abstain.
All right, with that, the motion carries 3-0 with one abstention. And with that, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item, which is member comments. So does anyone have any comments, anything they want to relay before we move on to our next scheduled meeting and adjournment? All right, hearing none. Our next scheduled meeting is June 10th, 2025. Yes, David Cool.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'd like to make a couple of announcements for you tonight. We have some upcoming meetings, big meetings. The virtual open house is going to be held Thursday night at 6 o'clock. And that's virtual, so you'll be able to be anywhere in the world and tune in to the virtual meeting on the waterfront redevelopment project. And I think some of you have attended those meetings. They've been in person before, the first two, and this one will be virtual. So you'll be able to hear the experts from the Center for Creative Land Recycling, as well as this one will be special. The other consultant called Cascadia will be there. So they'll spend about 45 or 50 minutes talking about the land use economics of the waterfront redevelopment. So a lot of detail will go into whether or not certain things are feasible. And so that'll be an exciting meeting. Certainly hope all of you have time to tune into that. I understand you're all busy and have other things to do, but we sure appreciate you attending these meetings for us. One other aspect is we're advertising now for more planning commissioners. As you know, the council changed their policy, and now they've been through all that process, and now they're starting to advertise. So hopefully we'll have some additional planning commissioners before long, but I do appreciate all four of you showing up.
Very good. And that
So-
is May 15th?
May 15th, this Thursday.
Okay.
The next meeting I'd like to direct your attention to would be the June 3rd City Council meeting. We're going to be discussing the Economic Development Strategy and Action Plan. We've been working with a company called Better City that's been putting that together for the last 6 months. And that's a strategy on economic development. So we've been through a draft and we've sent comments back to Better City. And they'll be returning to be able to present to the City Council on June 3rd. So those are two big steps we're taking in the direction of economic development and redevelopment. That also folds into, of course, the comprehensive plan, which you hear about all the time, and that's continuing. One other announcement, I'm retiring at the end of this month, and so I just want to thank all of you for your help and participation in putting this meeting together. I think some of our success stories, including the staff and everything they've done for us, certainly has been a success story. We've spent a lot of time doing teamwork building. We built a lot of team building between the engineering department, the planning department, and the building department. Prior to my showing up, it was broken. And as a team, we've all spent a lot of time trying to put that back together, and it works. So that's been one major success story. We've also used a concept called Lean, which focuses on improvements and continuous improvements. And that's been our focus for the last 5 years. The other thing we've done is we've digitized our permitting and planning system through an electronic format. And that's going to be a big plus for us. It already is, because we're able to track all of our information electronically and not have to pass paper around to various offices like we used to. And we're also finding a benefit to the electronic system through our public records. Our public records are digitized now so that we can respond to all those requests that people have for records. Having it all in an electronic system, all the work that Ray does on current planning, and all the work that our building department does on building. So we think that those improvements will help set the tone for a long time, and these upcoming meetings certainly can help give us a track to run on in the future. So again, I want to thank all of you for your participation. It's been good working with you, and I'll still be around somewhere, so probably playing golf with Tim someplace close by. So thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's all good.
Very cool. All right. And so to back up one, the the city council meeting for the economic development on June 3rd is at, what time is that at?
That's the normal time for city council. I think they're at 5:30.
5:30.
That'll be
Perfect.
right here in this room.
Very cool. All right. So with all of that, right, our next meeting, our next planning commission meeting will be June 10th, 2025, 6 p.m. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Unless we all want to stay here and just keep talking about stuff.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Moved by Fry. Do I have a second?
Second. Kevin wants to stay.
Second by Bradley. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Have a good night, everyone.